Okay, Senator, let's address the elephant in the room just a little bit. New York Magazine described you as a bland white guy you've never heard of.
And
that's a fair description. Is that the elephant in the room?
We're going somewhere with this. I understand that might be harsh, but I spent several days talking to people here in Iowa, and I struggled to find people who were familiar with you.
But you're still here.
Right.
So in the last 9 months to a year, what have you learned about black people?
Well, first of all, a level of frustration and a fear of an exhaustion, I guess, with being taken for granted.
What can a president do about the fact that when you actually drill down in the data, a lot of what appears to be happening is purely individual racist incidents? Mm-hmm. A white doctor looking at a black woman on a table and saying, I'm just not going to work as hard for you today, and coming into the room with some stereotypes. How do you legislate against that? How do you fight that from the office of the president?
Well, you fight it, first of all, by making a health equity strategy at the centerpiece of how your administration handles health. I'm proposing that we supercharge the Office of Health Equity and Justice, have that in HHS, but also have it in every department that has any bearing on health. We've got to train doctors and clinical staff who are exhibiting if it's explicit bias, then we need outright enforcement, right? We also need to tackle...
Is enforcement removal from their jobs?
Well, if you are racist, if you are nakedly racist, then you have no business being in charge of being in care of anybody. But also, we got to recognize that there are institutional patterns of racism. We got to make sure that people are alert to the extent to which, for example, a black patient describing being in pain is less likely to be believed. And we got to find out how much that's been internalized, perhaps even sometimes by staff of color, which is why making sure that we have more diverse clinical staff, training and educating more black doctors, nurses, and practitioners is necessary, but not sufficient. We got to make sure we're dealing with things like environmental injustice that help propel this, right? Again, before you even get to the clinical environment, the fact that you may have been redlined into a neighborhood where there's more contamination or more air pollution. We've seen the statistics on things like asthma and how much more of a threat that is to black and brown children. Means that we got to be acting literally on the safety of where you live. I mean, look no further than Flint, where children are being poisoned, not only as a consequence of racism in something like a medical system, but in the setup of the entire environment in which they live. So my point is that this is systemic. The harm is systemic. The racism is systemic. Therefore, the solutions have to be systemic. But so many of them can be acted on using the powers of the presidency.
So you're unique among the entire field in that you have had a bunch of white supremacists who just have decided somehow that you're their guy. Now, it's different dealing with this as a candidate, dealing with it as a president. So how does a President Andrew Yang deal with the issue of white supremacy in America?
Well, first, I was stunned to hear that anyone who has any kind of hateful ideology in their hearts would support me, because I certainly don't look like the poster boy for white supremacy.
I mean, because I want to back up, because I want to point out that I started off with a question about white supremacy and dealing with that, this is something you've said is a problem in America, but we ended up with talking about handing people money. I mean, does handing people money fix racism?
Of course not. So as president, one of my top priorities would be to label white nationalist terrorism as its own category of terrorism and say, look, by the numbers, this is the most prevalent form of terrorism in the country today. And you can't fight something if you don't measure it. So that's something we need to do. Unfortunately, it's just more stressful being black in this society than it is being white.
But one stat really struck me. And it said that if you're born in the bottom quartile economically and you're white, you have a 4 times greater chance of making it to the top quartile economically. And it hit me because I was born in the bottom quartile economically. And I worked hard. I started these businesses from scratch. And I felt really good about my success. But then I read this thing and I said, it was just a lot easier for me. And I probably had much easier access to capital than someone just like me with the exact same idea, the exact same set of skills, who was black.
And in fact,
And
if
I
you're
said,
black and middle class, you're more likely to fall out of the
absolutely.
middle class. Yes.
And this all gets to how we allocate capital in this country. We're just not allocating it to the people who need it, to their communities and to the individuals.
Do black people deserve reparations?
Yes, in a form that we have to figure out.
Like, divide and conquer has always been the tool of the oppressor.
Right. Although Donald Trump is sure taking it to new levels. Yes.
True enough. Well, and that's sort of the point, because I think a lot of white people don't actually know that quite as well. Or a lot of poor white people don't necessarily feel it in their bones the same way. So you're a white person, right?
Yeah.
And you're a teacher. You were a teacher. So
long time.
My question to you is, how are you going to convince, if you become the Democratic nominee, the many poor white people in this country that centering federal policies on the needs of black and brown people is a good idea and won't threaten them?
So,
well, and before we go there.
Oh, sure.
Because there's that bully in the back of the classroom or
Yeah.
the back of the bus, right? That's throwing all kind of vitriolic stuff to perpetuate this thing.
That's right.
Yeah.
And both Alzo and I were bullies in the back of the bus. So
Yeah. I was more of a class clown. I wasn't.
Yeah.
Anyhow, so let us know, and we might interject with some, common, like, hey, what about this?
But, you start in the right place, and that is the bully in the back of the classroom. So this notion of turning people against people as a way to build strength for yourself is something Dr. King called out. It was a part of, I think, the speech you were talking about. And part of the problem, when he says, so Donald Trump wants to turn white against black and brown. He wants to turn straight against gay and trans.
Sure.
He wants to turn Christian against Muslim. He wants to turn everybody against immigrants, particularly immigrants of color, because he's hopeful that as long as people are fighting each other, as long as they think there's just one cookie left on the plate, and if she gets it, I don't get it, then no one will notice that he and his corrupt buddies are stealing both the wealth and the dignity of this country. So I think the first thing you do with any bully is you call them out. You can't back down from a bully.
What is Black Twitter?
Good.
So, Senator, on that note, by your logic, should Democrats focus on turning out the brown and black vote in those states?
Because, of course. You can't win without turning out
rather
that
than
vote.
appealing to, those who were voting for Trump.
I think that Stacey Abrams, who should be the governor of Georgia, said it best when she said, just because you don't go to a meeting like this one for a few years, you don't lose your right to assemble under the Constitution. Just because you don't go to church or mosque or synagogue or temple for a few years, you don't lose your right to worship. And just because you haven't voted for a few years, you should never lose your right to vote under the United States Constitution. So automatic voter registration.
On top of all that you have said, we have a Trump administration which is racist, which is xenophobe.
Senator, I think there are a lot of people who support universal social programs, but are skeptical that they by themselves are capable of undoing the damages of hundreds of years of white supremacy.
What Trump believes is that he can succeed politically by dividing the American people up based on the color of our skin, based on where we were born, based on our religion, based on our sexual orientation. That's what he believes, based on our gender.
How you doing, Mr. Vice President? Pleasure to meet you.
Good to see you.
Likewise.
How you doing?
I'm doing well. I'll tell you in a few minutes how well I'm doing.
I think you'll be all right.
You can smile. It's okay. You're sitting there staring at him. I promise it's okay.
One final question for you.
Go ahead.
Go for it.
So it's a very simple question. Do you feel that the Democratic Party takes the black vote for granted?
I think they have, but if you know my record, and I'm just going to flat say it, I never, ever, ever, ever had. Not once. I'm a United States Senator because of the African-American community. The African-American community turns out in my state every time I've run at the same percentage in an off year they do in a presidential year. And if you notice, I have overwhelming support from the community because I've never taken for granted. That's what got me involved in politics in the first place.
Why is Senator Sanders leading you with black voters under the age of 35?
He is not leaving black voters under the age of look, just all I know is I'm leading everybody combined with black voters.
I'm winning.
You got everybody.
Yeah. Oh, wait. Let's get this straight. Name me anybody who has remotely close to the support I have of the African American community nationally.
Well, actually, Vice News just did a poll that showed that Sanders is a bit behind you, but he
A
does
bit.
have significant black support. I mean,
but
it's
he's
not something
way
to sniff
behind
at.
me. He's way behind
A
me.
bit and a ways is
Oh, yeah. Come on, man. Give me a break. You know better.
Come on, man, me?
You know better. You know better. There's a reason why I have more support of elected black officials. 3 former members of the chair of the Black Caucus, black mayors. I mean, come on.
On a very personal level, why do you think that black people like you so much?
Because they know I know them and they know I care from the time I've been 16 years old. I came home from law school and Dr. King had burned down.
But what does it mean to say you know black people?
It means that I've worked in the East Side. I deliberately went and worked for 3 years to make sure I was the only white guy that worked in the East Side because, I wanted to understand. I was involved in the civil rights movement, but
what did you want to understand?
What I want to understand, I didn't realize, for example, as the only lifeguard in the projects, I didn't realize that, in fact, we'd sit there in the key room on the half hour we had lunch. I remember Jamie Rolls asked me, Joe, do you have a jerry can? I said, what the hell do you need a jerry can for, Jamie? He said, I'm going to see my grandmother. She lives in South Carolina. I looked at him. He said, Joe, you don't understand. I can't stop at any gas stations. You don't understand, Joe. I learned that I lived in the middle of a city, that, in fact, these were all other athletes like myself. I happened to be the only white guy of the 17 people working there. And I didn't realize they lived in the middle of a city. They really didn't know any white guys. They didn't know the white community.
But you do get that just because you're the only white dude in a community of black folks doesn't mean that you understand them.
Well, no, I don't. You ask go to Delaware, ask anybody I've ever worked with whether they think I understand. I can't. My mother would say, you want to know me, come walk in my shoes a mile. I can't fully understand. Nobody can. I can't understand why I'm strongly supportive of gay marriage. I can't understand what it's like not to be able to love somebody that you care about, happens to be the same sex. I can't, but I know enough to know and see the pain. You can see the pain in people's eyes. You know it. You understand it. And I'm not saying I am black, but I want to tell you something. I have spent my whole career with the black community. That's why, especially young reporters, they go, well, guys, they like Biden. I wonder why so many African Americans like Biden. They know me. They know where my heart is. And they know what I've done. And I'm very proud of it.